When my husband passed away, I thought the pain of losing him was already the worst thing I could endure. But then, during the reading of his will, my heart shattered all over again. $6 million, along with the house where we had lived together for 25 years, all of it was left to our daughter. And me, the wife who had cared for him until his final breath, was given nothing but a decaying cabin in the woods, its roof leaking, its walls peeling, and its floorboards creaking with every step. I hadn't even processed the shock when my daughter turned to me, her voice sharp as a blade. "Go live with the pigs, you pathetic old woman." I walked away in the rain, my legs trembling, my tears mixing with the mud. I thought my life had ended there with a broken heart and an empty home. But only a few days later, in that dark, musty cabin, I discovered a secret Graham had left behind. A secret powerful enough to turn everything upside down and bring my daughter to her knees before the truth. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I am Marjorie Bennett, 67 years old. I have lived my whole life in a small town in Pennsylvania, where brick-paved streets lead to old wooden houses and church bells ring every Sunday morning. I used to be an elementary school teacher, spending nearly 30 years in the classroom before retiring early to take care of my family. All my life, I believed that love and sacrifice for my husband and child would be enough to guarantee happiness. But on the day Graham's will was read my husband, I realized there are bitter truths that even maternal love cannot cover. The reading of the will took place on an early spring afternoon, in Attorney Halvorson's office. The room smelled of old oak, the walls lined with shelves of worn leather-bound books. I sat on a frayed leather chair, my hands clenched in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly I feared the whole room could hear. Next to me was my only daughter, Sloane Bennett, 38 years old, successful attorney in the city. She wore an expensive black suit, her hair glossy and waved, her lips painted bright red. She sat upright, eyes fixed on the file in front of her, as if she already knew everything that was about to be announced. Attorney Halvorson, a man in his 60s whose glasses constantly slid down his nose, cleared his throat before opening the papers. "We will begin with the last will and testament of Mr. Graham Bennett," he said, his voice steady but heavy with weight. I held my breath. For 42 years, Graham and I had built everything together, the house on Maple Street, our savings, even the rose bushes I still tended on the porch. I thought everything would be divided fairly, or at the very least he would make sure I was provided for, the woman who stood by him through every hardship. Halvorson read, "I leave to my wife, Marjorie Bennett, the cabin on Old Quarry Road, along with everything inside it." I frowned. The cabin? It was a small, run-down wooden house Graham had inherited from his father. We had never lived there because it had no electricity, no running water, a roof that leaked, and rotting walls. I waited for him to read on, hoping this was only a minor part of the will. But then Halvorson continued, "I leave to my daughter, Sloane Bennett, the house on Maple Street, all bank accounts, investments, and the sum of $6 million. The whole world seemed to stop. $6 million, the house where I had lived nearly half my life, all of it went to Sloane. And me, I was left with nothing but a dilapidated cabin. I stammered, barely whispering, "There must be some mistake, right?" Halvorson looked up, his eyes flickering with a hint of pity. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm afraid not. This is the signed and certified will. The terms are very clear." I turned to look at Sloane. She was smiling. A cold, triumphant smile, without a shred of compassion for the mother who gave her life. Her eyes gleamed as if she had finally won what she had always craved, everything. We left the office in silence. The April sun beat down too brightly, so harsh it felt cruel. On the drive home, Sloane said nothing, but her glance at me in the rearview mirror said it all. "This is my house now, and you're just a guest." That night, I still cooked dinner as usual, roast chicken and potato salad, Graham's favorite. I hoped Sloane might soften, might realize something. But as I set the plates on the table, she said flatly, "Mother, we need to talk about living arrangements." I looked up. "What do you mean?" Her voice was firm. "This is my house now. And I think it's time you had your own space. You still have the cabin, remember?" I was stunned, putting the knife down on the table. "Sloane, I've lived in this house for 25 years. This is where your father and I built everything. That cabin has no electricity, no water, the roof is collapsing." She crossed her arms, raised an eyebrow. "That's your problem. I don't want this to get ugly. You have 1 week to pack." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "You can't do this. You're throwing your own mother out of her home." And then she shouted, her voice sharp and cutting the air, "Go live with the pigs, you miserable old woman." I froze. That sentence didn't just throw me onto the street, it erased every year I had spent raising and loving her. That night, I lay in the empty room, staring at the familiar ceiling, my heart twisted as if I were a stranger in my own home. I knew that in just 1 week, this place would no longer be mine. And I would have to leave, to a cabin I had abandoned my whole life. But I also knew one thing. My life wasn't ending here. I left the house on Maple Street after 25 years. In just 7 short days, I had to pack nearly my whole life into 3 old suitcases and a wooden box. In that box were yellowed wedding photos, a few of Graham's keepsakes, and the thick notebook where I had recorded recipes for the family. I loaded them into the trunk of my 1998 Honda Accord, a car so worn it screeched every time it started. I gripped the wheel, tears streaming down my face but teeth clenched so no sound came out. In the rearview mirror, Sloane still stood with her arms crossed on the porch, her gaze smug like a victor. I didn't look back again. If I did, I knew I wouldn't have the strength to leave. The road to Old Quarry Road was familiar yet strange. I remembered passing it with Graham years ago, never paying much attention. The dirt road twisted and jolted, flanked by maples and oaks turned rusty brown. The sound of tires crunching over gravel was hollow, like my heartbeat then. At the last bend, the cabin came into view. It stood isolated, lonely on a weedy plot of land, like a husk waiting to collapse. The cabin looked worse than I remembered. The paint had peeled off in wide patches, exposing gray wood weathered by storms. A window frame was broken, glass cracked. The porch steps wobbled with every gust of wind, creaking like a lament. Weeds rose to my knees, covering most of the path to the door. I stopped the car, my hand trembling as I fit the key into the rusty lock. The hinge screeched loudly as the door opened to reveal a dark, musty space. Inside, the air reeked of rot and dust. I set my suitcases on the floor, a cloud of dirt rising, making me cough. Weak light from the window revealed tattered curtains swaying. The ceiling was stained with leaks, some spots punctured enough to show the sky. Every step I took on the wooden floor creaked. A broken table, chipped chairs, and a cabinet with a missing hinge sat like relics. The first night was agony. No bed, just Graham's old blanket spread across the cold wooden floor. I curled up, clutching our wedding photo frame. Through the hole in the roof, stars shone bright, but I felt no romance, only despair. My tears soaked my sleeve. I cried not just for losing the house, but for losing the daughter I had given everything to. The next morning, I forced myself up. I inventoried what was left. A few burned-down candles, a dying flashlight, a thin torn blanket, dented pots scattered on the floor. I wrote them down in my small notebook, telling myself it was a start. Water was the first challenge. I remembered a public well half a mile from the cabin, deep in the woods. I carried 2 plastic buckets down the rough path. The wind cut through me, the buckets heavy, my shoulders burned, my hands blistered and bled. Once used to holding chalk and books, my hands now carried survival. I clenched my jaw, knowing no one else would do this for me. Days blurred with hardship. I cooked plain meals, watery potato soup, stale bread, well water. At night I sat by the candle's glow, staring at Graham's photo, listening to birds to drown out Sloane's cruel words. One morning, as I swept leaves from the porch, a figure approached. It was old Mr. Dempsey, a neighbor a mile away, in his 70s, thin but sharp-eyed. He nodded, leaning on his cane. "Mrs. Bennet, I heard you moved back here." I forced a smile. "Yes, this is my home now." He looked around, then lowered his voice. "Don't underestimate this land. It's worth more than you think." His words stunned me. Before I could ask, he patted my shoulder and walked away, fading behind the trees. Worth more than you think. I wrote it down in my notebook as if it were a clue. That evening, a message buzzed on my phone. It was from Sloane. "Don't bother my lawyer anymore. Everything is settled. Accept it, Mother." My hand trembled. I had never called her lawyer. Yet she felt the need to slam that door shut, just to remind me she still held power. I placed Graham's wedding photo on the rickety table, whispered, "You left me here, but I won't break, I promise." Then I blew out the candle. Darkness filled the cabin, but inside me, a flame of resolve was lit. The next day, my phone rang. It was Nancy, my sister-in-law. I thought maybe I'd hear some comfort, but her first words pierced me. "Marjorie, why did you cause a scene at the will reading? I heard you yelled at the lawyer, slammed the table, even threatened to sue if you didn't get money. You disappointed me." My chest tightened. "Nancy, that's not true. I just asked for clarification." I sat quietly the whole time. "Please believe me." Silence. Then a sigh. "Sloane told us everything. She said you embarrassed everyone. I don't know who to believe. Just let it go." One by one, relatives pulled away. A cousin texted, "Don't demand money from Sloane anymore. Everyone thinks you're greedy and unstable." Even church friends sent word, "Marjorie, maybe take a break from prayer group. People are talking. Find peace first." The worst was Helen, my sister. She called, blunt. "Marjorie, are you drinking? Sloane said you've been drunk every night talking nonsense. I'm worried." I was speechless. "Helen, I haven't touched a drop. Do you really believe her over me?" Silence. Then, "I don't know anymore." I hung up, my heart pounding, trapped in a cage of lies. Sloane hadn't just taken my house. She was stealing my name, my dignity. That afternoon, as I struggled to light damp wood, there was a knock. Mr. Dempsey stood there with a paper bag. "Brought some potatoes. Roast them, they'll warm you up." I couldn't speak, only nodded. He set them down, then looked at me firmly. "Don't believe the gossip. I know you, Marjorie. You're not greedy. People talk nonsense." Tears slipped down my cheek. His words were the first lifeline I had felt in weeks. "I believe you." That was enough to keep me afloat. That night, by candlelight, I opened Graham's old wallet. Between faded cards, my fingers found a cold piece of metal, a key. Heavy, unfamiliar, etched with tiny stars. And strange patterns. Not for a door, not for a safe I knew. I turned it in my palm, my heart racing. For the first time in weeks, despair loosened its grip. Graham had left me something. A secret. Perhaps the cabin wasn't just a burden. Maybe it was the beginning of everything. I clutched the key in my hand and whispered, "Graham, you didn't abandon me. You left me a clue, didn't you?" That night, I sat beside our wedding photo as the candle burned down and darkness spread. But inside me, for the first time in days, there wasn't only loneliness and humiliation. I felt a small flame flicker to life. The storm still raged around me, but in my coat pocket, a key waited to be unlocked, and I knew, from that moment on, my life would turn in a different direction. From the moment the key fell out of Graham's wallet, my mind could no longer rest. Every night, as the candlelight flickered across the wooden walls, I pulled it out, turned it over, and studied it, trying to guess what it might open. The etched star symbols were too sharp, too deliberate, to belong to something ordinary. I had a strong feeling that Graham, somehow, had left me a message. One drizzly morning, I decided I had to explore every corner of the cabin. I started with the living room, moving old furniture, running my hands along the cracks in the walls. The sound of rain dripping through the leaky roof beat like a restless drum urging me on. After hours of searching, I realized the house, though small, held many forgotten spaces. Everything looked old, but I knew Graham never kept things without meaning. Finally, my eyes landed on the wooden door leading to the basement. In all the weeks I had lived here, I had never dared to step down, afraid of the musty smell and the dark. But that day, I drew a deep breath, switched on the dying flashlight, and carefully walked down the creaking stairs. The basement was larger than I imagined, low ceiling, damp stone walls, spider webs draped everywhere. The earthy smell mixed with rotting wood made me grimace. I swept the beam of light across the space, one corner piled with soggy cardboard boxes, another hung with rusted garden tools. I was about to turn back when the light caught a wooden shelf pushed against the wall. Unlike everything else, this shelf seemed deliberately placed, blocking off a section of wall that didn't match the rest. My heart pounded. I stepped closer, laid my hand on the shelf. Dust coated it thick, but when I tugged gently, the whole shelf shifted. It wasn't fixed in place. Summoning all my strength, I dragged it aside. After a few seconds, the shelf gave way, revealing a dark metal wall. And in the middle of it, a small iron door appeared, no higher than my waist, with a lock engraved with the same star symbols as the key Graham had left. I nearly stopped breathing. My hand trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket. Metal scraped against metal with a harsh sound as I slid it into the lock. I turned it gently. A sharp click echoed through the silent basement, sending chills over my skin. Slowly, the iron door gave way, revealing a narrow compartment inside. There were 2 items: a thick envelope tied with old thread, and a small metal box, heavy in my hands. My heart raced as if it might burst out of my chest. I carried them to the rickety table, pulled out a chair, and with trembling hands, untied the envelope. The papers inside smelled of old parchment mixed with faded ink. I spread them under the flashlight. My eyes widened. Land maps spanning hundreds of acres, stamped by the county land office. Attached was a mineral rights certificate, everything in Graham's name, legally transferred to his wife. To me, I could hardly believe it. My hands shook as I traced each figure, each faded red seal. Alongside was a geological report, dated only 2 years ago. It confirmed the land around the cabin contained large quartz deposits with strong signs of other gemstones. On the edge of the report, I recognized Graham's familiar handwriting in blue ink. Wait for the right time. I sank into the chair, tears spilling down my face. Graham had prepared this long ago. He let me endure being cast aside, driven from the warm house, but in truth, he had placed in my hands a fortune far greater. My trembling hands opened the small metal box. Inside, beyond a few more legal papers, was a folded letter sealed carefully. On the front it read, "To Marjorie." My chest tightened. I drew a long breath and opened it. Graham's handwriting appeared strong, steady strokes. If you are reading this, it means you found the key and had the patience to follow it through. Marjorie, I know you will suffer when you hear the will, but this was the only way I could protect you. I left the house and money to Sloane not because I trusted her, but because I knew her greed. If I left it all to you, she would use every method, legal or not, to take it. I didn't want you to face her head on, so I gave her what she craved most. But in truth, the most valuable thing I had, I left for you, these mineral rights." I had to stop, gasping for breath. Tears blurred the ink, but I read on. "You've always thought of yourself as just a woman who sacrificed, a housewife who never truly owned her life. But Marjorie, I have seen the strength in you. You are stronger than you believe. These documents are freedom, a chance for you to live your years without depending on anyone. Sloane may think she has won, but in reality, she only holds an illusion. You are the one holding the future." My hand shook so badly the letter rattled. I pressed it to my chest as if I could hold Graham himself again. For a moment, the damp basement no longer seemed so dark. I felt him beside me, whispering strength into my ear. I sat there for hours, rereading each line. For the first time in weeks, I saw a clear path ahead. Graham had tested me, but he trusted I would endure. I folded the letter carefully back into the box. Candlelight flickered across the damp walls, but inside me, another light had been ignited. Not despair, but belief. I now held the power to change everything. That night, I returned to the living room, setting the box and envelope on the worn table. I touched Graham's photo frame and whispered, "You trusted me, Graham. Now it's my turn to prove I deserve that trust." I blew out the candle. In the dark, the key remained in my pocket, a symbol that my life had turned a page. Inside the metal box Graham left, I found another small folded paper tucked among the documents. His familiar handwriting read simply, 312, Norwood Bank. Just a few numbers and a bank's name, but I knew instantly. Graham was pointing me to another place, another hidden layer of this secret. The next morning, I put on my old heavy coat and drove my wheezing Honda toward the town of Norwood. Norwood Bank sat on Main Street, a red brick building with a green copper roof faded by time. I had passed it many times while living on Maple Street, never once imagining I would walk in to open a safe deposit box. My heart pounded as I stepped through the revolving door, approached the desk, and whispered, I'm here to open box number 312. Registered under Graham Bennett. The young teller with glasses typed a few strokes, then nodded. Yes, Mrs. Bennett. This box has a designated heir listed as you. Please follow me. They led me into the secure basement, long corridors lined with cold steel, harsh fluorescent lights washing everything in pale white. I shivered not from the chill, but from the sense of stepping deeper into Graham's hidden memories. The vault opened with a special key and my signature. Inside lay a thick file bound with string and a brown envelope stuffed with papers. I carried them to the metal table, my hands trembling as I untied the string. The file contained another geological report, even more detailed than the one I had seen in the cabin. Charts and diagrams mapped quartz veins, amethyst deposits, and hints of other gemstones. Most striking was a drafted contract between Graham and a mining company dated just 6 months before his death. The company's proposal was clear: purchase all mineral rights for $7 million, with an additional royalty if the reserves proved higher than estimated. I gasped. That figure alone was more than everything Sloane had inherited in the will. Graham had known the true value of this land, and he had chosen to entrust it to me in a way Sloane could never imagine. But I also knew I couldn't rush in. I needed someone to protect my interests, an independent lawyer untouched by Sloane or the old firm. After days of discreet inquiries, I found a name: Ariella O'Connor, a seasoned attorney known for her expertise in land and resource law. We met in her small office, lined with thick books and mineral maps. Ariella listened to my story, then carefully reviewed all the papers Graham had left. After nearly an hour, she looked up through her black-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Bennett, these documents are entirely legitimate. These mineral rights are registered in your name alone, separate from your daughter's inheritance. That means Sloane has no claim. I exhaled, as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest. But Ariella's tone grew firm. However, before negotiating with any company, you must obtain a new, independent geological report. The land may be worth even more now. If so, 7 million is just the floor. Don't rush. I nodded. Can you recommend someone I can trust? Ariella smiled. I know just the person. Dr. Nolan Pierce, over 30 years in the field, highly respected, meticulous. The next day, I met Dr. Pierce. A tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair. His eyes lit up whenever he spoke about rocks and soil. He came to the cabin with a case of strange tools, drills, a handheld microscope, a geomagnetic reader. For 3 days straight, he combed through every inch of land, taking samples, making notes. I followed with water and bread, anxious yet hopeful. On the third evening, as the sun dipped low, he returned to the cabin, laid a thick file on the table, and said, "Mrs. Bennett, I'll be blunt. This land is a treasure." Beyond the obvious quartz reserves, I found multiple veins of high-quality amethyst. More importantly, there are clear signs of green tourmaline, a rare gem with immense market value. Managed correctly, your rights here aren't just worth 7 million. They could be worth double, even triple. I froze, gripping the edge of the table to steady my shaking hands. His words pierced me not from greed, but from the realization Graham had been right. He hadn't abandoned me. He had given me a chance at a new life, greater than anything before. That was when I knew I wasn't just an old woman cast aside. I was the one holding a secret bigger than everything. Have you ever been underestimated, only to discover your own hidden strength? If so, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments. I would truly treasure hearing from you. That night, by candlelight, I opened Graham's letter again. I read his words. "I know you are strong enough to endure, and you will find what I left for you." This time, I didn't cry. I believed. I knew. My life was not ending in that broken cabin. I was not a miserable old woman thrown aside. I held a truth Sloane could never imagine. And I began to believe, deep in my heart, that the road ahead wasn't just survival, it was a chance to rise and reclaim everything, exactly as Graham had hoped. Dr. Pierce's report lay on the table. I flipped through page after page of dense charts and maps. Pierce sat across from me, his eyes bright in the golden light. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "Mrs. Bennett, this land is worth no less than $10 million. With the right negotiation, it could reach 15 million, and that's just for the current reserves. With royalties properly structured, you could secure income for years." My hand trembled on the pages. $15 million, far beyond anything Sloane had inherited. Graham had known all along. He had never left me empty-handed. The next day, I brought the report to Ariella's office. She read carefully, tapping her pen. Finally, she looked up. "Marjorie, this report is solid. My advice, do not sell quickly. Don't let anyone sense the true value before you're ready. You need time to learn how contracts work, to understand the game. If you sign blindly, you'll lose your advantage." I nodded, my heart pounding. Ariella was right. I needed to prepare quietly, patiently, just as Graham had written. We talked for 2 hours, crafting a plan. I had to keep my cover intact. To the outside world, I remained the poor widow in the rundown cabin, beaten down by life. Only then would Sloane and the town leave me alone. That evening, I sat in my car outside Ariella's office, realizing the irony. To protect a fortune, I had to pretend to have nothing. That night, I made a list on the wooden table. 1. Leave the cabin exterior untouched, no repairs. 2. Secretly install electricity and underground water. 3. Learn contract terms from Ariella. 4. Avoid direct contact with Sloane, never let her suspect. The next morning, I hired a discreet crew from another town. paying them extra to keep quiet. 2 days later, when the first light bulb flickered on in my dark cabin, I sat down and wept. That light wasn't just electricity, it was hope. With power and water, I began to study. Ariella handed me a thick packet on contract clauses. I underlined each term: royalty, profit share per ton mined, environmental protection, responsibility to avoid lawsuits later, force majeure, clauses to protect rights during natural disasters or war, and, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing for battle. Strange words slowly became tools in my hands. With a red pen, I underlined and scribbled notes in the margins: must demand at least 7 to 10% royalty, or require clear environmental liability clauses. Every evening, instead of crying like I did in those first weeks, I sat under the desk lamp and wrote out business scenarios. One page read, sell all mining rights, quick profit. Another page, lease long-term, steady income for years. I compared them, weighed them, and asked myself what I really wanted. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from excitement. I had never felt this way before. I, Marjorie Bennett, 67 years old, was deciding my own fate, not Graham, not Sloan, no one else. One late night, I looked up at the wooden ceiling stained with leaks, the yellow electric light casting shadows across the cracks. Suddenly, I laughed a laugh both bitter and sweet. The cabin my daughter spit on, calling it a pigsty, had now become the place where I was reborn. Right here, I was building a new life. I no longer saw myself as the abandoned mother, the discarded wife. I saw myself as a woman quietly preparing her counterattack. I understood Graham's plan. He let me endure humiliation so I could learn to stand on my own 2 feet, and I was doing it. I gripped his letter, rereading the line I already knew by heart: wait for the right time. Every time I read it, my heart thudded with certainty. Yes, I would wait. But when the time came, I would strike. For the first time in years, I went to bed without bitterness weighing me down. I saw the road ahead clearly, step by step, steady and sure. I knew Graham was somewhere watching, smiling, whispering that I was finally moving in the right direction. In a small town like Norwood, nothing stays secret for long. News spreads like sparks on dry straw, one whisper at the market, and the whole town knows. And lately, the name on everyone's lips was my daughter's, Sloan Bennett. People said she had just driven home a bright red Mercedes convertible, gleaming like it had rolled straight off the lot. A woman from church whispered she saw Sloan carrying brand new Louis Vuitton bags, her heels clacking against the tile floor. Then more news. She was planning a trip to Paris, not for work, not for study, but simply to shop until she dropped. Folks looked at each other with a mix of awe and disapproval. Some shook their heads. When money comes too suddenly, people just spend it all without thinking of tomorrow. I listened but stayed silent. Outwardly calm, inside me sharp pangs twisted. I remembered Graham's words in his letter. Sloan is impatient. She always wants everything right away. And it hurt, because he was right. One morning, at the Norwood Bank, I went in to withdraw a little cash and froze when I heard Sloan's voice echo from the loan office. Her tone was half sweet, half demanding. Yes, I'd like another loan. I can mortgage the Maple Street house and my inheritance from my father. I need capital for a very promising personal project. I stood rooted, my whole body stiff. In just a few months, she was already willing to mortgage everything. $6 million and the house Graham had spent a lifetime building, now nothing more than leverage for her schemes. At the counter, a young teller whispered to her coworker, not noticing I was near, "I've never seen anyone burn through money like this. At this rate, even $6 million won't last 10 years. That sentence echoed in my mind all day. Back at the cabin, I opened Graham's old notebook and picked up a pencil. If Sloan spent $50,000 a month with the cars, designer clothes, parties, and travel, she'd blow through it all in less than 10 years, and that was without counting the loans and interest piling up. Seeing the numbers on paper, my hand shook. More than ever, I realized Graham had foreseen it all. A few days later, I passed by the biggest fashion boutique in town. Through the glass, I saw Sloan twirling in a shimmering silver dress, grinning at the clerk, clutching more bags. Each swipe of her card brought a smile, but I recognized it wasn't joy, just a fleeting high. Her eyes were empty, the gaze of someone spending not from need but from fear of tomorrow. I stood outside a long time, aching inside. I remembered her as a child. At 7 years old, tugging at my sleeve in the market, "Mom, I want this, I like that." I always gave in. Graham would shake his head with a smile. "You're spoiling her." Back then, I thought it was innocence. Now, watching her burn money, I knew the habit of wanting everything had never left. The town buzzed with more stories. They said she threw a lavish birthday party, hired a band, even fireworks. Others whispered she was eyeing a risky real estate project in California. I nodded and let it pass. But deep down, I was heavy with sorrow. Every night, I sat alone in the cabin and wrote in my journal, "Sloan is digging her own grave. I don't need to rush. I only need to wait." Sometimes memories of little Sloan came back, me cradling her through fevers, sitting through school plays, every parent-teacher meeting. All those years now felt like someone else's story, no longer connected to the stranger I saw in that boutique mirror. Some townsfolk asked me, "Mrs. Bennett, you must be so proud your daughter's famous all over town." I only smiled. Proud? How could I be, knowing every dollar she spent was another brick pulled from the house Graham built with his life? I chose silence. I didn't need to fight, didn't need to argue. Money runs out. When debt crushes her, when friends vanish, when pride has no ground left, Sloan will face reality. And me, I just needed to sit still, observe, and wait. That night, I sat, before Graham's wedding photo. The yellow lamplight fell across his face. I whispered, "You were right, Graham. She doesn't know how to keep it. But I'll wait. When the truth comes out, I'll be ready." For the first time in months, I felt my heart lighten. In its place was a rare clarity. A collapse was inevitable. And when it came, I would be standing strong, holding the secret Graham had left, the one thing Sloan would never touch. Life always turns in ways I once would have laughed off. But I had gone from being cast out by my own daughter, living in a cabin with a leaky roof and sagging porch, to sitting in a bright office, signing a contract worth tens of millions. That day, in Ariella O'Connor's office, the air smelled of oak and fresh paper. I sat across from her, staring at the thick contract stamped in bold red. Ariella, her brown hair tied back, sharp eyes softened by warmth, slid the contract toward me. "Mrs. Bennett," she said firmly, "this is Northern Ridge Mining's official offer. They agree to pay $12 million upfront and 5% royalty on mining revenue for the next 30 years. I've reviewed every clause. It's all in your favor. This is one of the safest and smartest deals I've ever handled." My palm was damp as I gripped the silver pen, the words on the page blurred with tears. That day, Sloan screamed, "I belonged with the pigs." I thought my life was over. Yet here I was, Graham, though gone, still protecting me in his own way. I signed. The pen scratched a bold line across the paper. In that moment, my heart pounded like a drum. I knew my life had turned a corner. Ariella didn't stop there. The next day, she helped me set up a personal trust. "Think of it as a steel shield," she explained. "Even if Sloan sues or anyone tries to contest it, they can't touch this money. It's yours, solely yours." I looked at her through tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Thank you." My whole life, I had let others decide for me, first Graham, then Sloan. Now, for the first time, I was in control. I kept everything secret. Despite $12 million in future royalties, I left the cabin unchanged. The paint still peeled, the porch still sagged, the windows still cracked. Passers-by still pitied me. One day, Mrs. Gonzalez, the florist on the corner, stopped by with a bag of bread. "Mrs. Marjorie, I know times are hard. Take this, eat something." I smiled, accepted it, and thanked her without shame. Sometimes, to protect the truth, you let people believe you're weak. Let them think I was just the poor old widow abandoned by her daughter. I didn't mind. While I quietly secured my future, news of Sloane flooded the town. They said she sold off cars, canceled her Paris trip, and kept appearing at the bank with a tight face. One morning, I stopped at the pharmacy for herbal tea, and there she was. Sloane stood at the counter, eyes darkened with circles, hair messy, makeup smudged. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the pharmacist. "Can you check if my insurance covers this? I need stronger sleeping pills, and more for anxiety." I froze behind the shelf, my chest tightening. Before me wasn't the confident, arrogant daughter who once threw me out. It was a broken woman clinging to pills just to keep going. She turned, and for a second our eyes met. Gone was the challenge, the scorn. All I saw was despair. She looked away and walked out without a word. I left with trembling hands. I felt no triumph, no joy, only deep sorrow. Graham's lesson for her had begun a harsh one she had to endure herself. That night, I sat at the wooden table, Graham's letter under the yellow lamplight. I read again. "Wait for the right time." I whispered, "Maybe that time is coming." And indeed, a few days later, the phone rang in my quiet cabin. The screen lit up with Sloane's number. My breath caught. How long had it been since she last called? I answered. Her voice quivered, weak, like a lost child. "Mom, I need to see you. Please, I need you." I closed my eyes, letting her sobs echo through the line. Never in my life had I heard her sound so small. No longer the sharp lawyer, no longer the woman who screamed I belonged with the pigs. Just Sloane, broken, desperate, pleading. I drew a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "All right, Sloane, come, I'll be here." When I set the phone down, I sat in silence. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, the leaves rustling like Graham's whisper. I knew the moment I had both dreaded and awaited had finally come, and I was ready. That night, the wind roared through the old trees on Old Quarry Road. I sat alone in the cabin, my unfinished journal before me, when I heard the sound of an engine in the distance. Not the smooth hum of a Mercedes, but the rough sputter of an old sedan. I stepped onto the porch, gripping the doorframe, and saw Sloane. She stepped out, utterly drained. Her business dress was wrinkled, heels scuffed, hair tied in a rushed knot. She stood under the porch light, red-eyed, looking at me as if I were her last hope. "Mom," her voice cracked, trembling, I'm in trouble. I owe $400,000. If I don't pay by the end of this month, I'll lose everything. The house, the firm, my reputation." I stood there, silent, staring. Memories crashed back: the day she screamed at me to live with pigs, the day she tossed our family mementos onto the lawn, the day I left Maple Street in tears. I breathed deeply, voice steady but sharp. "Do you remember what you said to me, Sloane? You called me a burden, a miserable old woman. You threw me out, stripped me of every photo and keepsake. And now you come begging for help?" She crumpled onto the porch steps, covering her face. "Mom, I know I was wrong. I was stupid. I thought money would last forever. I thought I was strong, but I've only destroyed everything." In that moment, I stood at a crossroads. Part of me wanted revenge, to turn away, let her drown in her arrogance. But another part ached because no matter what, she was still my child, the same girl I once held through the night. Slowly I said, "All right, Sloane, I'll help you, but not the easy way. I can't throw money at you just to see you burn it again. If you truly want a chance, you'll have to pay the price. You'll have to change." She lifted her tear-streaked face. Desperate. "Tell me. Anything. I'll do it." I sat on the old porch chair, pointed at the spot in front of me. "Sit down. Listen carefully." Then I laid out the terms. "First, I will lend you $500,000 more than your debt, enough for you to breathe again. But this is a loan, not a gift. You'll repay it over 10 years at 5% interest. Banks would demand worse, but I'm giving you a chance." Sloane nodded frantically, whispering, "Yes, I agree." I continued, my voice stern. "Second, for the next 5 years, every Saturday you must come here, to this cabin, and work alongside me. Sweep the porch, tend the garden, fix the roof, whatever task I assign. You will learn what real labor means, without designer dresses or lavish parties." She froze for a moment, her eyes wide, then bowed her head. "All right, Mom. I'll do it." "Third," I pressed, "you will write a letter of apology, honest and complete, admitting everything you did to me, from throwing me out of the house to the lies you spread among our relatives. You will read that letter aloud in front of the whole family this coming Christmas. Do you have the courage to do that?" Her face went pale, lips trembling. "Mom, that's humiliating." I looked straight into her eyes. "Humiliating? Did you feel humiliated when you threw me out on the street? Did you feel humiliated when you called me a burden? If you don't have the courage to face your mistakes, then you don't deserve forgiveness of any kind." Tears rolled down Sloane's cheeks. She nodded, each motion heavy. "I'll do it. Mom, I'll do it." I sighed softly. My heart ached, yet felt lighter at the same time. Perhaps Graham, wherever he was watching, and he would understand why I chose this path. I wasn't giving Sloane free forgiveness. I was giving her a chance to redeem herself. A few days later, I kept my promise. I transferred $500,000 into Sloane's account through the trust fund we had set up. I knew the money was safe, tightly bound by contract, and Ariella had made sure every clause was ironclad. Sloane used the money to pay her debts. I heard her creditors stopped harassing her, and her small law firm was saved. But I also heard whispers, "Miss Bennett looks worn out, must be under a lot of stress." I said nothing. I simply added one line to my journal: "The lesson has begun." On the first Saturday, Sloane arrived at the cabin. Gone were the business suits and designer coats. She wore old jeans and a faded t-shirt. Her steps were slow, her face still carrying traces of pride not yet gone. I handed her a straw broom and pointed to the porch. "Sweep. It's been covered in dry leaves for too long." She glanced at me, hesitated, then bowed her head and began. Her movements were stiff, clumsy. The sun beat down, sweat rolling down her forehead. Fingers once used to pens and keyboards blistered and turned red. I stood at the doorway, quietly watching. In those awkward gestures, I saw something new: humility. Not humiliation, but the first time my daughter learned to bend, to accept that money cannot buy survival. I said nothing. I let the wind blow, let the broom's scraping fill the air. But in my heart, I knew this was only the beginning of a long journey. And for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of hope flicker in Sloane's eyes, the very light Graham must have wanted me to keep alive. In the months following that knock on my door, my life shifted quietly but unmistakably. Sloane still came to the cabin every Saturday. At first, she swept leaves and scrubbed floors with a scowl, each stroke heavy as if punishment. But gradually, I noticed her shoulders no longer stiff with defiance, her eyes no longer filled with resentment. One time, when I handed her a bucket to wash the wooden porch, Sloane looked up at me and whispered, "Mom, I've never done things like this before, but I'm starting to feel like I need them. They make me quiet." It was the first time I heard her voice without excuses, without the armor of false confidence. just truth, plain and fragile. And so the weeks passed. We began talking more. At first, just short phrases, "I'm done sweeping," or "Do you need anything else?" But then, one afternoon as we sat resting under the porch, Sloane suddenly asked, "Mom, when I was little, did you ever think I'd become someone like this?" I stayed silent for a moment, staring at the bare winter branches. Finally, I answered, "I thought you'd be strong. But maybe your father and I gave you too much, so you never learned how to truly stand on your own." Sloane bowed her head. I saw tears drip onto hands now roughened by weeks of brooms and shovels. I didn't hug her, didn't rush to speak more. Forgiveness cannot come from a single sentence, nor can it be rushed. Forgiveness takes time, takes action, and I knew both of us were relearning how to be mother and daughter. Then Christmas came. Linda's house, Graham's sister, was always where the family gathered for the holidays. Last year, I hadn't dared show my face, knowing everyone believed Sloane's lies. But this year, I went. I went not to prove anything, but because the truth needed to be spoken. The living room glowed with lights. The Christmas tree heavy with ornaments. The smell of roasted turkey thick in the air. Laughter filled the space, but when I walked in, a few eyes lingered, hesitant. I held my head high, took a seat, and stayed quiet. When everyone gathered at the table, I gave Sloane a small signal. She had prepared the apology letter weeks before one of the conditions I set. I watched her stand, hands trembling with the paper. The room hushed, only the crackle of the fireplace remained. Her voice, hoarse, broke the silence. "I know many of you still believe the story I told that Mom caused chaos at the will reading, that she was greedy and wanted to steal the estate. But today, I need to tell the truth. It was all a lie. I made it up to protect my own selfishness." The room froze. I saw Linda's hand stop mid-slice on the cake, her eyes wide. Sloane went on, her voice breaking. "I drove Mom out of Dad's house. I called her a burden. I took away even the family keepsakes. I humiliated her, the woman who sacrificed her entire life for me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know she never did anything wrong. All the fault is mine." A sob broke from the far end of the table. Someone dabbed their eyes with a napkin. Around me, I saw faces glistening with tears. When Sloane finished, silence hung heavy. Then, Linda rose, crossed the room, and embraced me. Her voice trembled. "Marjorie, I'm so sorry. I believed what Sloane said. I turned my back on you. I was wrong." I held her, tears soaking her shoulder. I spoke no reproach, only whispered, "Now you know the truth. That's enough." After dinner, when the family gathered by the tree, Sloane sat beside me. She no longer carried pride, only quiet humility. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been thinking. I can't keep doing the same work, fighting, clawing, taking. I want to shift to something else, helping families drowning in debt, guiding them to solutions instead of pushing them deeper. Maybe that's how I make amends." I looked at my daughter, and for the first time, in years, I saw a seed of goodness in her eyes. Not polished words, not pretense, just a tiny spark but enough to ignite hope. I laid my hand over hers, speaking slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't come from one apology. It's a journey, built from small actions every day. I can't say I've fully forgiven you yet. But I believe, if you keep changing, you'll find yourself again. And you'll find me too." She bowed her head, tears dripping onto our joined hands. Christmas night ended in the warm glow of lights and carols drifting from the street. I sat by the window, watching the first snowflakes fall. A strange peace filled my heart. I knew Graham was smiling somewhere. He hadn't left me only wealth or mining rights. He left me lessons in patience, in motherhood, in renewal, and above all, he gave me the chance to reclaim the daughter I thought I'd lost forever. A year after that Christmas night, sitting in the old cabin with the fire flickering, I knew it was time to close a chapter. I was no longer the woman cast out of Maple Street, trembling and broken-hearted. I had endured pain, uncovered Graham's secret, and learned to stand on my own. Now, I needed a new beginning, a place worthy of being called home. I chose a small house on a hill, not far from the valley where I grew up. From the porch, I could see the whole valley spread out like a green carpet, dotted with wooden houses, wheat fields, and a sparkling river. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, flooding the house in gold. It felt like returning to childhood, sitting on grassy slopes, dreaming of a peaceful home. The house wasn't large, but it was sturdy and warm. A wide wooden porch, a rocking chair where I read or watched the view, a small kitchen, bright and always smelling of coffee and cinnamon in the mornings. I decorated simply, keeping a few old photos of Graham, a few mementos from my teaching years. I didn't need luxury, quiet, and control over my life were enough. The day Sloane came, I remember vividly. She drove up in an old sedan, paint peeling, a far cry from the luxury cars she once flaunted. When she stepped out, she froze, eyes wide in disbelief. "Mom, this is your house?" Her voice shook. I nodded, invited her in. In the kitchen, I poured hot cinnamon tea, the scent filling the room. Sloane sat, her eyes roaming, her fingers brushing the freshly painted wooden railing. "I don't understand. Where did you get the money?" she asked, bewildered, almost whispering. I set down the cup and pulled a small wooden box from the drawer. Inside were Graham's letter, the mining maps, and the papers I had kept hidden all this time. I told her everything from the key in the old wallet, the iron door behind the shelf, the thick envelope in the damp basement, to the contract with Northern Ridge Mining. I told her about nights spent poring over clauses, about Ariella O'Connor's guidance, about the moment I signed the $12 million deal with royalties to last decades. Sloane sat in silence, tears streaming by the time I finished. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "Mom, you could have abandoned me. You could have let me drown in debt, and no one would have blamed you. I did terrible things to you, but you still saved me." I looked at her, my voice steady and slow, "Not because you deserved it, Sloane, but because I'm still your mother. No matter what you did, I couldn't turn away completely." She lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes shining through the tears. I saw no arrogance there anymore, only gratitude and genuine remorse. From that day on, Sloane truly began to change. She worked tirelessly to repay her debt early, taking on more and more cases. No more business suits, no designer bags. She dressed simply, focused on work. She accepted the hardest cases, representing poor families being pressed by banks, helping them negotiate to keep their homes. Some nights she returned late, ink on her hands, shadows under her eyes, but with a strange sense of fulfillment. "I've never felt like I was doing the right thing until now," she told me one evening as we sat on the porch overlooking the valley. Every Saturday she came to my house, working as promised. Sweeping leaves, painting walls, helping me with dinner. I noticed every detail, hands once soft, now calloused, posture once haughty, now bent tenderly over the flowers. These small acts became the bridge reconnecting us. No more fights, no more cruel words. Instead, there were quiet moments of peace, sitting side by side, listening to the wind in the trees and the twinkling lights of town below. I realized that motherhood, even cracked and scarred, could be repaired. Forgiveness isn't erasing the past, but giving the future a chance. I didn't erase the painful memories, but I left them as reminders to see the value of the change today. I learned to enjoy independence. I made my own decisions, from fixing the porch to managing the trust. I no longer feared dependence. And at the same time, I learned to open my heart to forgiveness, not with fancy words, but with patience, watching my daughter slowly grow again. Each evening, I sat on the rocking chair, watching the valley bathe in sunset light. I thought of Graham. I believed he was proud, seeing me not just surviving, but truly living. He would smile knowing I had found another version of Sloane, a daughter who worked, who humbled herself, and was learning to love again. The house on the hill wasn't just a shelter, it was a symbol of rebirth. A place where I proved I hadn't fallen, where my daughter and I rebuilt the bridge we once burned. Every wall, every door carried new faith that after everything, we still found each other. 3 years after that night, Sloane knelt on the cabin porch. I received news that made my heart skip. My daughter had repaid her entire debt 3 years earlier than required. The confirmation from the bank, printed clear in black and white, lay on the table. I sat silently for a long time, hand trembling as I traced the letters. In my mind, I saw the proud, reckless girl who once screamed cruel words at me. And now she had walked a long road, shouldering responsibility, climbing out of the pit on her own. I couldn't hide my smile. Sloane was no longer the daughter who only knew how to spend money like water. She had learned discipline, learned to work, learned to think of others. And I had learned something too. Sometimes, loving your child doesn't mean sheltering them, it means letting them taste the consequences, and then offering a hand at just the right moment so they still have a chance to make things right. Sloane's new work moved me to tears more than once. She didn't choose the easy path for quick money. She decided to rebuild her career from the ground up. Her small office sat on a modest street in town. Just one room with an old wooden desk, bookshelves against the wall, and a few photos from clients left behind as thanks. One afternoon, I stopped by and saw her sitting across from a young couple. They were worried because the bank was about to take their house. Sloane listened patiently, then gently pointed out possible options. I sat in the corner, quietly watching. In every word, every nod, I could see the change deep within her. She was no longer a woman who only knew how to spend. She had become a companion, a rescuer of hope for others. When the couple left with relieved smiles, Sloane turned to me and whispered, "Mom, helping a family keep their home means more than any car or dress I ever bought." I nodded. Warmth spread through my chest. Maybe Graham would be smiling proudly too, if he could have witnessed that moment. At home, I hung Graham's photo right next to the mining contract. For me, it was a way to say a belated thank you. Because of him, I had the chance to stand firm, the protection strong, enough to challenge my daughter while also giving her a path back. One evening, as we sat on the porch under the moonlight, I pointed at the photo and the contract beside it and said, "Do you see, money itself isn't wise. The person holding it must be wise. Otherwise, money will swallow you whole." Sloane laughed, a clear laugh tinged with regret. "You're right, Mom. I let money burn through my hands, and I learned that lesson at the highest cost." We both burst out laughing together for the first time. A mother and daughter's laughter echoed through a summer night without the weight of darkness. I realized that, in the end, we had both finished a shared lesson. I learned how to release resentment, and Sloane learned how to live with humility and responsibility. That summer night, I sat on the porch, watching the town lights twinkle down in the valley. The wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass, cicadas sang loudly. My heart felt more at peace than ever before. The phone rang. On the other end was Sloane's voice, trembling but full of emotion. "Mom, thank you for not abandoning me. Without you, I wouldn't have anything left. I owe you not just money, but an entire new life." I looked up at the starry sky and gently replied, "My girl, I want nothing more than to see you live with kindness." "That's the greatest gift of all." I hung up, my heart overflowing with happiness. Wealth, to me now, wasn't in the numbers, it was in the moment I knew my daughter had truly changed. Graham was right. In the letter he left behind, there was a single short line that carried an entire world. "You are stronger than you think, and Sloane can change too." Years ago, when I first read it, I saw it only as a kind of comfort. But today, sitting in my house on the hill, watching the daughter who once drove me to despair now slowly walk back onto a decent path, I finally understand what it truly means. I have become stronger than the woman I once was, the woman who trembled while clutching a few suitcases as she was cast out of her own home by her daughter. I did not collapse. I did not disappear. I stood up, reclaimed my voice, and my right to own my life. And Sloane, the daughter who once worshipped money like a god, who once made me cry through endless lonely nights, has now learned to live with responsibility and compassion. The house on the hill, the distant valley lights, the hum of summer cicadas, and the gratitude shining in Sloane's eyes, all of it stands as proof that, in the end, family bonds can be reborn. They are not perfect, not flawless, but they are real, and for me that is enough. And now, since you've patiently stayed with me all the way to this moment, I want to share something from my heart. You are part of this journey too. If you are listening, let me know where you are watching from so I can see how far this little story has traveled. Every comment, every subscription, every single like is not just a number, but an encouragement that keeps me telling these stories of justice, family, and the quiet strength of patience. Thank you for staying until the very end. To me, your presence, even if only for a few minutes of listening, is the greatest gift. It reminds me that in this wide world, none of us are ever truly alone, as long as there is someone willing to listen, to understand, and to walk beside us.